keep it for an archive too.
There you go.
Yep, you're recording.
You're
Okay.
recording, or
Yep. We're recording now.
okay. So let me get my screen up here, and we'll get things going here. Okay, the host has me disabled for screen sharing. So can you activate my screen share?
Okay, let's see. Let's see what. Okay, see if that helps it.
Okay, let's see if we can get her. Okay,
Did that do it?
well, it should.
Yep.
Okay, so let me get that bar out of there so I can start this slideshow. Okay, so tonight's presentation is underwater lighting. And I appreciate the photo committee asking me to talk to you guys a little bit about underwater lighting and kind of show you some ins and outs of how things work and stuff like that. For some of you guys, this may be kind of a little bit of review, because I know we have experienced photographers in the crowd here. But you know, I suspect that the majority of us are, you know, consistently capturing high quality underwater images with the use of underwater lighting equipment. And what we're going to talk about tonight, I'm not a videographer, so I'm coming at this from the perspective of a photographer who likes to shoot still images. But I think the lighting stuff actually applies to both photography and videography. So if you're a video person, stick with me. Hopefully I'll be able to give you some information that will kind of help you out with some things. So you see this, you know, these are all of the strobes that I own. I've got old Nikon strobes, the SB 105s. I've got a couple of CNC strobes. I've got two different models of Ike-Light strobes. I even have like a little underwater video light that I use for a focus light on my camera. Interestingly, the focus light, it produces a pretty high amount of light for its size. One of the sets of lights I use actually can be used, one of my sets of Ike-Light strobes can actually be used as video lights, but the little light you see on the front of the table there, right beside that SB 105, is actually more powerful for a video light than my Ike-Light DS 160. So one of the things I'll tell people is that you know, there are a lot of situations where natural lighting or the use of filters can result in some pretty amazing images and videos. But strobes, if you're doing photography, are really the way to go if you really want to light subjects. We obviously use natural lighting, and I'll talk about that a little more and actually show you some examples of where I used natural lighting to enhance some of the lighting work I did with my strobes. Natural lighting and filters are a really good topic for another seminar, particularly if you're looking at going to somewhere and taking video of large animals like mantas and stuff like that. A red filter can actually work pretty well with your camera equipment. So camera types here. You've got the humongous Nauticam rig here for a Nikon D300S camera with a couple of strobes on it. And we've got that sitting on the table next to a little GoPro that has double handles on it. And it was one little measly video light attached to that kind of thing. I'd love to show you an example of a larger video camera, but frankly, I don't own one. When I shoot video, I either shoot video with the GoPro or I shoot video with one of my other Nikon cameras, DS a D7200 or a D7100 camera. So, it doesn't really matter what size camera you're using. If you're using more along the lines of a smaller point and shoot type camera or a smaller mirrorless camera, don't let the size of this Nauticam rig kind of intimidate you. I use larger camera just because I've used these larger cameras pretty much my whole life, and I can get what I want with them. So don't worry about the size. Size really doesn't matter a lot in a lot of ways, because what you can do with the camera system actually is what's going to produce good pictures. And I've seen a lot of good pictures taken with smaller cameras. So let me start out. Let's talk a little bit about the science of underwater, taking pictures underwater. And most of you are very, very well aware. We cover this topic in basic scuba diving courses. We talk about that when you go underwater, there's actually filtration that happens in the water. The water, basically, they tell you, filters out different pieces of the color spectrum. And that's a little bit of, saying water filters the color out is kind of a little bit inaccurate, because it's not really the water that does it. It's the stuff that's in the water. Particles of stuff, even microscopic kinds of particles that selectively absorb different elements of the color spectrum. So you don't have to worry if you're shooting in shallow water and you don't have color loss as a major issue. Red is typically the first color to go. So if you're shooting a subject like this guy who isn't red, you're not going to lose much color if you're in shallow water. If you look at the top of that photo, you can actually see the water surface. This white shark is probably about, maybe 3 feet below the surface, from the surface to his nose. So there's not much color loss that happens with that. Let's talk about what happens when it does. Colors are selectively absorbed out of the water as you descend. Again, this is just basic scuba diving 101. They talk to you about this kind of stuff when you take your basic scuba diving classes. And again, just to reemphasize, it's not really the water itself that's absorbing the colors from white light. The absorption is everything from the microscopic particulates that are in the water to the larger chunks of stuff that are out there floating around. So the absorption rate of your color really depends on the clarity of the water that you're diving in. It makes a big difference. Here's just a general summary of depth-related color loss. 5 to 15 feet, you lose your reds. 15 to 25 feet, you lose your oranges. 35 to 45, your yellows go. 70 to 75, you lose your greens. And when you get down around 164 feet, you lose your blues in the color spectrum. But this said, here's something a lot of photographers don't really think about. The color absorption actually happens in every direction when you're underwater. It's not just your depth. It also involves color loss on the horizontal spectrum or the horizontal plane. So let's say you use your strobe, you take a picture of a large fish who's 5 feet away from you. You're close to the surface of the water, so it's not really a depth-related color loss issue, but on the horizontal, you're shooting at a fish that's 5 feet away from you. The strobe light travels to the fish that's 5 feet away. It's reflected back to you in your camera 5 feet away from the fish. How far did that light actually travel? Well, it's traveled a total of 10 feet. Guess what color is diminished from the fish image you just captured? And again, that's not vertical, dropping down in depth. That's just looking on the horizontal. What you just did was you lost a good percentage of your reds with that. And again, it depends a little bit on water clarity, but it's important for underwater photographers to get close to their subjects. You want reds? You got to get close and light them up. This particular seahorse is actually from the island there at San Carlos. I think I captured this image, got into a bunch of seahorses, I think out on South Point one day. The boat was actually anchored right on top of a bunch of vegetation that has seahorses hanging in it. And every time the anchor kind of shifted, it was shaking seahorses loose out of the vegetation. So you got to get close. Now, there are circumstances where, you know, it's a good thing to get close to your subject, even if your subject isn't red. Obviously, the legend here didn't have any red elements to him, you know, and he was coming at me right off the surface. I didn't really have to worry about losing any red when I took that picture. That picture was probably taken maybe 10, 15 feet away with a zoom lens set about 20 millimeters. So a lot of times when guys do shark cage diving and stuff like that, or they're diving with large animals, if they're not going to go real deep, strobes they don't even worry about doing strobes, because the subjects they're shooting really aren't that colorful. They're more along the white and gray lines. So positioning stuff. And this is probably, as I talk here, some of you may be going, oh, what in the heck? You know, we signed on to this presentation because we want to know how to position our strobes better and all this kind of stuff. And, you know, the question is, you know, where do you point your strobes or your video lights if you're going to light things up? And there's actually a pretty easy answer. You want to point your strobes at what you want to light. Now, don't go offline and bail out on me thinking, wow, we just took quite a bit of time to get around to him telling me just point my lights at what I want to light up. It sounds easy, but there's a lot of things involved in this easy idea about where we're going to put our strobes or our video lights. So let's talk a little bit about this. So what I've noticed over the years when I work with photographers is that a lot of times people really don't understand what they want to light. You've got to really figure out what it is you're trying to light before you can start positioning your lighting equipment to get the images that you want. Your strobe and light position has a major impact on the quality of the underwater images or videos that you're capturing. So here's really kind of a reality check for capturing underwater images. Here are 4 things that I think are really, really super critical. First of all, you must know what you want to light in order to put your lighting equipment in the correct position. Second, know what your foreground subject is, so that you kind of have an idea about how you want to light it up. Knowing what your foreground subject is requires knowing what image composition will be, and you must know how to use the light pattern from your strobes or your video lights in order to create the lighting effect that you want. Okay, now here's an example. If you look at this, your foreground subject is right in front there. And obviously that's a what? A turtle, right?
It's a turtle.
Right. That is a hawksbill turtle. Can you see secondary subjects in that slide?
There's the diver in the back and a fish in the front.
There's a kind of a fish outline in the front, and you also have what between the diver and the turtle?
Coral.
You've got coral,
Sure.
and the coral actually has some color to it, doesn't it? Okay, so, you know, setting that up, you know, if you're going to have a diver in a picture like this, you've got to have whoever it is in the right position. This picture was kind of an interesting one from Cozumel because obviously the turtle was within pretty easy strobe range. Just a little bit of a stretch to light up the coral in the background. And really the diver is far enough away that I'm relying on ambient light to actually light him up. And you can see some details on his wetsuit and his equipment there. But again, he's not the primary subject. This is from Cozumel, and this is a guy that I dive with from time to time there. He owns Tres Pelicanos dive shop. And so whenever I go with him, he always carries his lionfish spear. So he's always looking out to get lionfish. I had somebody who saw this picture once and they said, oh my gosh, that guy wasn't going to try to shoot that turtle, was he? And I was like, no. He just kind of happened along and the position was a good position for him to be in there. So, you know, you need to understand where you're going to put stuff in your frame when you're looking at this stuff and lighting it. And you have to know how the light patterns on your strobes work in order to do that. We'll spend more time with that shortly. Let's take a look at this one. Let's back up a minute. This is a wide angle shot, okay? Now, for some of you are going, well, gosh, is this guy just going to talk about wide angle stuff all night tonight? No. I do occasionally shoot macro. This is a picture of a Spanish shawl nudibranch. I believe it's from out in the Anacapa area in the Channel Islands. With this particular macro shot, the primary subject obviously is the nudibranch. I wanted to actually light that nudibranch effectively, but I kind of have a thing about these macro shots. I like the shots to actually show my subject interacting with the environment a little bit. So I needed to light up the vegetation that nudibranch was kind of hanging out on. So this one, the composition on it worked out pretty well as well with the macro lens. Let's talk about strobe lights versus video lights. And I've got my little baby strobe here, or my little baby video light that also functions for me as a focus light. And I've got this honkin' big Ike DS 161 strobe, which I might add also, you can use those to light video with. You're just not going to get as much light out of that as you would a really good quality, powerful video light, but they do work. So when you're looking at, you know, this kind of stuff, you know, the types of lighting equipment that you're using varies quite a bit. I often have people ask me, well, why do you even bother with those big clunky strobes? Why don't you just light up your subjects for your photographs with video lights? Video lights seem a lot easier to use because you can actually kind of see where the light's going. It's kind of like shining a flashlight. But a video light that won't really produce the amount of light that I need to work with still photography, the images that I like to capture. It's not to say you can't use video lights for still photographs, because you can. And I've seen some people who've been able to produce some pretty good quality pictures, still pictures with video lights. I just find for me, it's a lot easier if I use strobes. A pop of a strobe gives me a lot more light than I can get with a video light. And to be honest with you, to buy a video light big enough for me, I'd have to spend way more than I spend for strobes. And a good quality strobe isn't cheap. Most of you are sitting there probably thinking, yeah, we know that because my checking account's been stung a couple of times shelling out money for strobes. So strobes and video lights can't magically light up the entire ocean in front of you. If you're going to use video lights, particularly like these small ones like this, to try to light things for stills, I would recommend really giving macro a shot, because your chances of getting good images of macro, if you're working really close with one of these lights, works a lot better. I have a former dive partner that her husband actually thought he was getting her a really good deal. He bought her a nice little point and shoot housed underwater camera, or camera that she can take underwater. And the guy at the dive shop kind of fastened a video light that was actually a little smaller than the one I've got here to it, in kind of a ramshackle looking setup. And she took it out and tried using it and came back and asked me, she said, why the heck can't, like I can't get my pictures to look like the ones you get. I'm having all kinds of problems with this, and what should I do? And I said, well, shift over, put a larger tray on your little housing there. I recommended a couple of video lights for her to get. I said, use this light that he bought you as a focus light, and, start playing around shooting some pictures with strobes. And she immediately got, much better results with being able to take pictures of things that she wanted to shoot pictures of. So just keep in mind the limitations of the lighting equipment that you're working with. And again, when you're working with light, it's always important to know where you're going to place your subject in your camera frame and how you're going to light it. So let's talk a little bit about the reason a lot of you signed up for this workshop or showed up tonight. And that's to talk about actually lighting some subjects. So let me introduce you to a couple of my buddies here. I've got a couple of models that I'll have help me out with the presentation tonight. This is Bruce. So I've got Bruce. Dave Hale probably recognizes Bruce if he's here tonight.
Yep.
Dave has taken some pictures of Bruce, and Dave has actually taken some pictures of Ariel. So I've got Bruce and Ariel. Bruce and Ariel are going to help us out with some stuff tonight. So let's talk a little bit about some of the basic concepts that kind of go with positioning our lights the right way. Most underwater photographers use an arm system to position lighting equipment. And it's really common if you're out and about doing stuff, it's common to see lights attached to two arms, attached to a camera with a 2-arm, 3-clamp system. Arm lengths vary depending on your preference. I know some people who do a good job with their photography and videography and stuff, and they only use like one arm to get the light kind of away from the camera and up where they can kind of position it in different locations for lighting. I use different combinations of 6-inch, 8-inch, and 12-inch arms. And this gives me a lot of flexibility for doing different lighting kinds of things. What we're going to do is, for farther away subjects, like wide angle subjects, we're going to actually pull or push the lights out away from our housed camera for those far away subjects, and we're typically going to pull it in closer for closer subjects. Natural light comes from above, and we want your photographs and your videos to look natural. So it's pretty important to make sure that we are focusing our efforts on positioning that lighting equipment above the center line of the lens. If we have it too low, if it's down too low, it's going to basically eliminate the shadows, and your subject isn't really going to look natural. So where you put your lights is going to determine how much junk appears in your image. That junk is called backscatter, and we'll spend a little bit of time here talking about backscatter when we're working with our lights, trying to get the right lighting, lights moved into the right place. Definitely keep your adjustments small. You don't have to do huge adjustments. Usually it's just a matter of changing angle a little bit in order to get things like you want them. There's 3 things we worry about when we're taking pictures with lighting equipment: color, clarity, and contrast. We want to make sure that our underwater equipment is set correctly so it will help us to get the color, clarity, and contrast that we want. So let's talk about how your lights or your strobes work. Doesn't matter if you're using a video light or if you're using a strobe. The light coming out of that strobe, it comes out in an angled pattern. Basically, it's a cone-shaped pattern. Different brands of strobes have different light angles to them. In other words, they will actually emit the light at different angles and provide different types of coverage. And you can use diffusers, which I highly recommend, to widen the angles, to actually widen your area of coverage and actually soften the light a little bit. The downside of using diffusers is that the diffusers tend to kind of reduce the range of your lights a little bit. So you kind of have to learn your lights and know what you're doing with them. Here's just some of the different angles, kind of illustrate this whole thing of how the different angles from different manufacturers work. My CNC YS D1 strobes, if you're just using the plain strobe, it produces a light that is basically 80 degrees by 80 degrees. If I put what they call their 100-degree diffuser on there, that obviously widens the light beam to 100 by 100 degrees. And then I also have a diffuser that is a 120. I've got diffusers that are 120 degrees that I can use with those CNCs as well. So lots of options, but you have to kind of know, anticipate what you're going to be using. My ike lights, which I use quite a bit, without diffusers, it's a 90 by 90 degree cone. I've got a standard diffuser I use most of the time on my ike light, 161s and 160s. That standard diffuser, the light comes out of there at 100 degrees. And then I actually have a set of dome diffusers, which are actually pretty cool. They widen the light quite a bit. They widen it out to 120. My old Nikonos strobes, they sort of produce a cone, but it's kind of a square cone. They actually produce a light pattern that's 103 degrees by 84 degrees. And then the standard diffusers on those 115 to 96 degrees. So different manufacturers, different types of light coming out of those strobes. Also, it's worth noting that the amount of strobe or video light output is often something people like to kick around. I get questions sometimes from guys who have different brands of strobes. They ask me why I'm using those ike lights, because the ike lights aren't as powerful as the kinds they're using. We talk about light output for electronic light devices. You're talking video lights, you're talking light produced in what they call lumens. The higher the number, the higher the amount of lumens, so the brighter the light is. With strobes, it's called a guide number, and the higher guide numbers usually are up in the 30 high, kind of mid to high 30s range in terms of light output. I think the light output just is a personal perspective on light output stuff. I think that the amount of light output is probably more important for video lights than strobes. If you happen to be a videographer, you probably want to invest in the most powerful video lights you can afford. My DS161 strobes have a guide number of 24. I've got a set of strobes that's slightly more powerful. I've got the CNC set of YS D1 strobes. Those are in the neighborhood of like 32, and I think the brand new CNC strobes that are out, I think they've produced a YS D3 now that is like in the neighborhood of maybe 36 or something like that. So I tend to dial the power down on my strobes anyway. I use them with diffusers. So having that really super high output for strobes for me is not that important. My 161 strobes, the ike light guys that I have, as I said earlier, will produce video light. I can actually run those constantly for video. And they produce a 500 lumen light. And that's way less. The little Kraken light that I use as a focus light actually produces a light with a power of 1500 lumens. So 3 times more light than those DS161s do. And I don't know, some of you, if you've ever been on a night dive with somebody who's shooting video professionally or something, video lights, you can get some really big ones. If you go to Hawaii and do the night manta dive, there's a gal who actually earns her living shooting night manta videos and selling them to people who do the night manta dive. And when she shows up on site out there, if I happen to be out there doing that, I get a little irritated with her because the lights that she uses are so darn powerful. They literally blind me while I'm trying to do my thing. I'm kind of, it's like, well, I'm okay. She's trying to earn a living and I get that and everything. But, I really wish she wouldn't point those lights my way when I'm trying to take pictures of mantas. Anyway, so probably not a lot of argument for me if somebody were to say, well, bigger is better in the world of video lighting. Yeah, I'd probably tend to agree with that. So let's talk about that. Let's just use my DS 160 strobe here and the 100 degrees of light coverage that it projects when it fires. This is what 100 degrees of light looks like coming out of the strobe. Okay, this is why it's a little more difficult, I think, to use strobes effectively than video lights, because you have to visualize where the light from your strobe is going to go. Whereas with a video light, you've got the light on, you can kind of point it and adjust it like you need to have it be adjusted in order to get what you're after. So this is, this is only like one-dimensional. This is just a flat deal. I couldn't come up with a way to actually design a cone at 100 degrees that wouldn't have taken me several hours to put together. But I think you'll I think you understand the idea from this. So 100 degrees of light coverage. So there we go. There's Bruce. And he's hanging out with that, single strobe cone hit light coming hit that single light, that single 100 degree light beam from that strobe coming at him. So we just point our strobes what we want to light, right? So it's easy, it's really easy. Double coverage. We're pointing those strobes, 2 strobes in this case with intercepting light beams, and here we are. We're lighting up Ariel with those. But oh my goodness, what are all those little spots and dots all over those little white pieces of foam core that I used to demonstrate this for you? What do you think that would be?
That's going to be the backscatter.
You're talking backscatter. So if you look at how the lights are hitting her, if there happens to be a bunch of backscatter in the water, I've got those lights angled so that they're lighting up all that backscatter just like I'm lighting her up. And here's a good example of not such a bad photograph, but if you really look at that closely, there's an awful lot of backscatter in there that is kind of messing that up a little bit. Especially, it's particularly apparent if you look at the diver's wetsuit. He's wearing that bare wetsuit and he's got all that gunk that looks like it's stuck to the wetsuit. It's actually stuff I lit up when I was taking that picture between where my strobes were at and where he's at. So you can also see some in the water. You can see some on the sea lion. Now they do tell me, and I haven't tried it yet. They tell me that with Photoshop, you can actually remove that layer of stuff and this particular photograph could probably be salvaged pretty well to, you know, clear those images up a little bit, but it's not really that important to me. Other than the guy that was in this picture, whom I don't even remember who the heck it was, I doubt anybody wanted to buy that picture and hang it on their wall or anything. So not tremendously important. It was a cool opportunity for a shot. I wish I could have. Unfortunately, sometimes with sea lions, things happen so quick you just can't. You have to really be on your game. A lot of times get lucky to have your strobes angled the way that you want them to. So best way to avoid this stuff is to avoid lighting it. And, you know, when we're shooting video, you know, if I had a video of this guy dancing with the sea lion, seeing that stuff in the water probably wouldn't bother you that much because it's moving. Particles of stuff, they're going to be kind of moving through the video, and you're not going to really, most people really don't pay that much attention to it. But with still photography, it lights it up, and they're just little chunks of white that are stuck to the images out there. So again, low visibility. If you're not diving in real clear water, you're going to really have to get close to your subject to get to avoid lighting that backscatter up. So here's how we would do our strobes if we were going to adjust the strobes to reduce the backscatter on Ariel here. What we want to do is we want to avoid lighting as much water between the subject and the camera as we can. And we do that by adjusting the angle of the strobes. Those strobes are both turned slightly out, which kind of gives you some intersecting light. And so when I click the picture, if I clicked a picture of her like this underwater, I wouldn't have to worry about all the particulates of stuff that are between the subject and the camera lens. As you move out farther, and I'll apologize a little bit for this, but I was limited on how big my table space was and how many pieces of foam core I had laying around that I could use. So I just kind of sandwiched some in there to extend the light angles a little bit. But here's a picture of Bruce. He's taken from a little bit farther away. And so we adjust our strobe angle, our strobes out a little bit. If you look, there's not a huge amount of adjustment for angle there. If you look at the actual angle of the strobes, just a little bit. Gets us what we want. Okay, so we just adjust it for differences like that. Now, what about having your subject too close? You get a subject that moves inside where your strobes are set. Obviously, you would have to angle the strobes in a little bit. And here's what a real life image looks like when you have something that kind of ignores where you have your strobes pointed and decides to stick his nose on the front dome port of your camera. This is actually kind of still a cool image, but this particular sea lion literally was trying to stick his nose right on the front of my dome port. So I couldn't light the area under his nose. His mouth is pretty much shadowed. The shadows on his eyeballs, you know, both sides kind of looks a little funky there because it, again, he swam right inside the strobe coverage there. So it happens. Sometimes it you know, it happens despite your best efforts. You know, so let's take a look at some other strobe positioning kinds of things here, and keep in mind as we go through this that your strobe positioning really depends on the angle of light your strobes emit where your subject is. So let's take a look at some macro strobe positions here. Your arm and strobe positions are determined by your lens and your strobe light pattern. Again, focus on lighting your subject, not your background, and lower your power. I very seldom shoot my strobes at full power. I would rather underexpose a subject than overexpose it. With an underexposure, I can do some adjustments in my post processing, software, I can actually increase the exposure time, and actually, if the subject's a tad too dark, I can lighten it up without losing a lot of detail. If I blow it out with too much light, I'm not going to be able to do that. So here's a picture of a single strobe set up for macro. So single strobe for macro. You've got the strobe fairly close. You'll notice on this particular setup, I do have a focus light. This old housing I have doesn't have a shoe mount on it, so I have this, the focus light's actually mounted on one of my strobe arms. But for single strobe macro, a real common position is to use it up over the top of the camera. You want it angled so that your light cone picks up the subject without lighting the backscatter. Keep in mind, this particular strobe is a CNC, and what did we say that CNC? Well, I've got the 100 degree filter on it, so the light's coming out of that at 100 degrees. So here's a side view. This is how that strobe would look. We've got Bruce sitting down there on the left-hand side. The camera and the housing are set up. The strobe is actually angled so that he's going to get hit with that 100 degree light discharge from the strobe when it fires. And here's a picture taken with a single strobe using a macro lens. This is a very, very small stonefish out at Catalina Island. I think the ones at Catalina are a little more colorful than the ones we have down in San Carlos. Low position double macro strobe. Again, we're up above the center line of our lens. We've got those strobes angled, and let me go back. I'm lighting up with my focus light, and strobe angle is going to hit old Bruce there without any problem. And here's another picture of this is done with a double strobe set for macro. Sometimes we want to use a high single strobe for macro, and the high position that's actually quite high. That's kind of what it looks like from the side. Again, depending on what we're trying to do with lighting on our subject, what we're trying to capture, you may want to, if you have a two-arm system where you can extend that strobe up, you may actually want to extend the strobe up to where you can, it almost looks like you're trying to light right over the top of your subject there, but what you're actually doing is you're using that 100 degree light beam from the strobe to just light the subject without lighting the backscatter that's between the subject and the camera lens. And that's a picture what a double strobe on macro, a high macro like that looks like. Lower angle strobes can be used. You can use them for larger macro kinds of subjects. We're still up pretty high, but sometimes you've got a macro subject you want to really light it up good. Here's an example of that. This is a sea hare. It's actually quite a bit larger than a nudibranch. This sea hare is probably maybe 6 inches long, and the idea was to light it up and light up the background and the foreground of the image, because it obviously has some color stuff there. By the way, when I talk about color a little bit, please remember that I'm a disabled underwater photographer. I don't see color at all. What you guys are seeing as color, I see in shades of black, white, and gray. So when I am working with images like this, I actually have a color editor who helps me out with this stuff. Colleen is very, very good with color, and she'll she'll check me on some of these things so I don't go too crazy in my post-processing software with them. I want to make sure the colors are kind of realistic as we're looking at things. So let's shift over and talk about wide angle strobe positions just a little bit. Again, just like with macro, your arm and strobe positions are going to be, determined. The position is going to be determined by the lens you're using, the light pattern of your strobes. You're trying to light your subject, not the backscatter stuff. Trying to angle your subjects. Trying to angle your strobes away from your port to reduce your backscatter, and how much angle really kind of depends on the distance that you've got to your subject. Natural light, again, I'll just mention this because it's worth noting. I think a lot of photographers forget about this. Natural light produces shadows under their subjects, and so you want to keep your strobes above the center line of your lens. Again, angle away from your port to reduce that backscatter. And then I always like to review what's going on with my power settings as I'm clicking images to see if I need to adjust my power settings or my angles of light coverage. And here's kind of a real simple, this is what I call a close focus wide angle position. I've actually got the strobe pulled in pretty close. They are above the center line of the lens. And this particular port on my iClide housing, I've got this one set up with a 10 by 24 millimeter lens there. So it's kind of a close focus situation. And here's a picture that was done with things set that way. This is actually a giant damselfish from the La Paz area, and this particular fish was sitting on a wreck. What you're seeing kind of in the background there, that's a bunch of growth stuff, on the wreck that I was actually taking a picture of there. So that's a fairly common one if you're shooting wide angle. It's probably the angle if you're shooting pictures of sea lions that want to be real overly friendly. They're coming in pretty close and stuff. It's probably a good way to position your strobes. That way you're not having to reach way out to adjust a strobe angle or anything. You can actually keep them kind of tucked in to try to point those light cones where you need to have them pointed. If we do have large subjects, we do want to extend the arms out, and a little bit of point of discussion here, and I've had this discussion with photographers as well. I've seen photographers that if they're shooting, for example, in this situation, I'm using a combination of 6-inch and 8-inch strobe arms to extend those strobes out away from the housing. And some photographers prefer to have the short ends, the short arms hooked on with the clamp to the actual housing handles. Others prefer to have the long segment in there clamped to the handles and have the shorter end out there attaching to the strobes. For me personally, I find with my housings and my strobes, I like having the longer section on the outside. One thing, I've got floats on those on the outside, and it kind of helps me, provides a little buoyancy out there to help hold those strobes up so I don't have to clamp the clamps down quite so tight on them to keep gravity from pulling out. These iClides are kind of negatively buoyant, so you kind of have to provide them with a little flotation help. The other thing I find that works good for me is when I pack my stuff around to and from the boat, I'll pack it by sticking it in a large soft cooler, and I can fold my arms and stuff up easier if the short arm segments are on the inside rather than the outside. But Other people don't, they prefer to do it another way, and that's cool. Whatever works for them, I'm okay with that. So you want to make sure you're able to cover the area that you want to cover with large subjects. Now, here's a photograph that was done with the arms on the strobe arms extended as far out as they could go. This particular photograph is from the window dive site on the west side of the island there at San Carlos. And my idea here was to capture the image of the sea lion, whom I might add was preparing for a run on me to try to grab my camera housing away from me. Sometimes they make a game of that. They'll try to snatch and grab your stuff. And what I wanted to do was capture the sea lion, capture the rocks in the background, and particularly capture what's going on up above with the water breaking on the rocks up there. So what I was trying to do was light up a large area by pulling those strobes out, pretty good distance from the housing. And it worked. I mean, I managed to capture the image that I was after with that. If you're shooting pictures of things that are hanging out on sandy bottoms, you know, you may end up wanting to position your strobes up high like this to light subjects up. Show another position, another angle on that, kind of a quartering view on it. And that's what we can use if we're going to try to light up guys like this. We've got a stingray that's cruising through some vegetation. If you look underneath, you'll notice there's shadow there. And what I wanted to do was make sure that I had the strobes up high enough to where particularly his near wing that you see turned up next to the plants there, I wanted to shoot that, have the strobes up at a high enough angle to avoid casting a large amount of shadow on the body. There's a little bit of shadow there that kind of blends in with the body of the stingray, but I was able to actually capture the stingray image without throwing some real unnatural looking shadows on it. So that's why I would use kind of that. And I don't use that position very much. I don't find that there's a large market of pictures for pictures of stingrays. So when I'm shooting stuff that's close to the bottom, I may shift to that just to see if I can capture an image or two. Now, what about those images where you want to shift you want to use your camera in a vertical format rather than a horizontal format? Well, if you've got two arms on each end connecting your housing to your strobe, you can do that. You do want to make sure that the arms are long enough to be able to position your strobes the way you want to position them. And so here's, actually shifted the camera vertically. When I shoot, I'm right-handed. If I'm going to shift into a vertical position, I want my right hand with my trigger finger up above my head, so I'm actually be able to trigger that camera with my right index finger. And I want those, again, I want the strobes up above the center line of the camera lens. And, I don't shoot a lot of vertical stuff. Somebody once told me I was on a dive boat one time with a guy that had some pictures published in a national magazine, and he was rightly very proud of being published. And, I was like, hey, good for you, dude. I'm really happy that you've got a market for publishing stuff. And he commented to me, he says, he said, I find it's a lot easier if I shoot vertically. My pictures fit better in magazines if I can shoot vertically rather than shooting horizontally. And, he suggested that I might want to try that. I was like, well, I don't have any magazines scratching on my door right now. So, the opportunity presents itself and I'll use it. But this is something, particularly as you're working with different kinds of subjects, you may want to try it. But remember, that strobe position is going to really affect the quality of the images that you're getting. So I've had people ask me this question, can you shoot large scenes with a single strobe? And the answer is yes, you can. There are certainly times when you can do that, and there are times when you have to do it. Okay, it's just not as easy to light up a large scene with a single strobe. Circumstances kind of dictate what you're able to do. If you're going to shoot, if you're stuck in a position where you've got to use one strobe for a large scene, what you want to do is get that strobe up above the camera lens so that you're lighting as much area as possible. Now, if you look at this picture closely, you'll notice that there are actually 2 scent cord cables coming up from the camera housing there, from the plug-in. And if you look really, really closely, you'll notice that one of those scent cords is plugged into the strobe. The other one is just kind of dangling there at the top. You can see the top of the strobe. It's right about the area where the clamp that clamps the arm onto the ball mount on the strobe is located. And I did this on purpose because this is the setup I had to use when I shot this picture. My wife and I had decided to sign on for a trip to La Paz, Baja California Sur, with a group of divers from San Diego area. And we got down there, and the whole trip, the trip was loaded with photographers. Some very, very good photographers, I might add. And we were supposed to be there for 7 days, doing 7 days of diving. And the second day, I started having problems because one of my strobes wasn't working properly. And it really wasn't working. It was working very, very poorly, and ultimately it failed. It just stopped working. I suspected the problem was the battery pack. And I had managed to go on that trip without a backup battery pack. I only had one pack for each battery, or for each strobe, one battery pack for each strobe. And so here I am, I'm like on day 3 of a 7-day dive, 7 days of diving trip. And I've got one working strobe and one dead one. Nobody else on the boat was shooting Ikelite strobes. No, so I couldn't borrow a battery from anybody. We asked the shop people that we were working with, I asked them, I said, hey, is there any place in La Paz where I can pick up and I need a new battery pack. This battery pack died. And they said, no, sorry, we don't know anybody who carries those. So I was stuck. I needed to figure out how to make one strobe work. And I was able to do it. Again, it wasn't easy. It wasn't the easiest thing I've ever done. But what I ended up doing, I didn't have a single sync cord either. All I had was my double sync cord. So what I did was I sealed off one of the strobe ends on the sync cord and used some zip ties. I had packed some extra zip ties just in case the mouthpiece fell off of my regulator. I needed to reattach it or something. So I had some zip ties. So I just zip tied my sync cord together. So I wouldn't have a big long sync cord dangling around out there in the water. So yeah, you can do it, but if you're going to do it, you're going to need to really, you're talking a big scene here. If you look at this, obviously there are sea lions that are kind of playing in a kind of a big fissure between some rocks there, and the rocks actually have a lot of cool stuff going on. You've got some soft corals there. There's some color there in the water, and you've got some sea lions playing, up top there. I like this picture. I look at this picture, it reminds me of that dive trip, and that was really a fun trip. And so I like to look at this picture. But again, you got to figure out how to work with what you've got. And so, yeah, you can do it with a single, but it's not an easy thing to do. So best recommendation I give you, if you're shooting 2 strobes, make sure that you've got backup battery pack stuff going for them. You know, I'd probably even pack an additional strobe nowadays because I had this experience if I'm going to go off on a trip that's costing me money like that one did. So as far as strobes go, one of the things to remember before we jump to this next slide, let me go back, you know, two strobes are better than one, but one is better than none. And I think we could probably say the same thing about video lights. Two is probably better than one. One is better than none. So think about that when you're planning your equipment. So black background. I've had a couple of people in the club actually visit with me about this. So, you know, what's involved? How do you create a black background, you know, for a subject that you're trying to capture the image of? And, you know, there's a really easy answer for this. The easiest way to get a black background is just to shoot at night. Okay. But that's probably not the answer you really wanted to hear. So let me talk about black background stuff just a little bit. These, by the way, are from Big Island in Hawaii. That's off the Kona coast. That's some mantas during the night manta dive there. So there's some components you have to be aware of when you're going to try to capture subject with a black background. Shutter speed is important. It would help if you have open water behind, you know, your subject. As far as, you know, shutter speed stuff goes, most of the time we're shooting at the sync speed that our cameras are set up for strobe photography. With my Nikons, that's either 250 or 320, 1/250th of a second or 1/320th of a second. Some cameras have sync speeds that drop as low as 1/200th of a second. So you want to make sure that you pick the sync speed that your camera is going to operate the best with. I mentioned before going back to shutter speed, I mentioned having an open water background. I'll show you why that's important here shortly. But when you're looking at your subjects, what you really want to do is you want to make sure that you've got subjects that are positioned high enough and wherever they're at so that they have open water behind them. And, you know, in addition, we've got things like, you know, managing your strobe placement, managing your power management stuff, and aperture settings. So take a look at this guy. Here's a French head blenny. And this guy would probably look pretty good with a black background, but I couldn't get a black background on him. It was way, way, way too cluttered. He was basically sitting in a hole in some rocks, and if I tried to actually move in and get that picture, it probably would have spooked him, which isn't something we want to be doing anyway. But it has way too much clutter in it. But take a look at this one. Got a picture of a Panama Graysby fish, and this guy, there's no clutter behind him. It's just open water behind him. You can kind of work your angles, side and downward angles when you're shooting different subjects, but you know, you have to be careful, because if you are shooting in daylight hours and you happen to point your camera a little bit too high, you're going to end up getting that ambient light that's going to prevent you from getting much in the way of a dark background there too. So the sea line there's no possibility there of really having a black background either. Let's go back to our models and talk a little bit about precise strobe positioning and your power management stuff. What you want to do, if you want a black background, you kind of want to minimize lighting the water behind your subject as much as you can. And we're going to show you how to do that with Ariel here, and just a camera and a couple of strobes and those 100-degree angles or cones of light that we have coming from the strobes. It's kind of the opposite, a little bit of what we're trying to do to prevent backscatter. But if you notice what the strobe position actually is there, you still see that the strobes are positioned in a way that's going to try to eliminate as much backscatter as possible there. So what we want to do is try to eliminate that stuff. And if we can sandwich our subjects with, by putting our strobes like on either side, it's going to help us as far as creating that black background goes, especially if we have background open behind him. Now let's shift to aperture. You know, how far your lens is, how far the aperture of your lens is open. Now, what the aperture setting is going to play a pretty big role in how dark your background actually can be. As aperture along with your shutter speed controls how much light comes through the camera to hit your sensor, your film, or whatever you happen to be using. Take a look at this one. Did I get the black background on him? This nurse shark shot at 1/320th with an aperture of f8.
Pretty much.
You think I did, Dave?
I think it could probably be able to get darker, but I mean, there is, to me, there is, you do see some of the background, so it's not a total black.
Where do you see the color change in the background? Feel free to jump in, guys. Where's the color change?
Well, at his dorsal, bottom of his dorsal, it starts turning blue is what I see.
It starts turning blue. So an aperture of f8 didn't get me the background I was after with this picture. I think it's still an okay picture. I don't know that the blue actually distracts that much from it. There's a dive shop in Cozumel that has this picture hanging on its wall down there, and they like it just fine. That's the Tres Pelicanos dive shop down there. Those guys have a copy of this, a large picture of this, and they like it just fine. They think it's a pretty cool picture. But I didn't quite get the background as black as I wanted to. But take a look at this guy, the Pacific Porgy. You know, this is what I was after with a black background. The other kind of nice thing on this was I was able to regulate my strobes in a way that the power from the strobes, so I was able to avoid having the silver reflection of light from the fish totally blow out the image. These guys they're pretty tough to photograph unless you get your settings and stuff just right. And I'd like to say it was skill on this, but I think I actually got lucky on it. What I did was I decreased my f-stop here. Instead of f8 like this guy, this one was done at aperture of f14. So the aperture stuff does really kind of make a difference. And what I will tell you is, for these guys like this guy here, aperture setting, I don't even remember off the top of my head what this aperture setting was at, but I thought I'd throw this in because one of the things a lot of people don't realize when they're doing underwater photography activities is that the aperture actually controls what the light in the background looks like. And what I was trying to do with this picture was I wanted to catch this shark with these, what I like to refer to as cathedral rays of light coming down from the surface of the water. That's those stripes of light you see coming in at an angle, kind of behind the shark there. And so, you know, the aperture actually controls what that ambient light looks like. Okay. And that's probably a topic for another workshop at some point, would be, you know, what kinds of photos can you get with different types of aperture settings and stuff. So anyway, so there we are. Do you have questions?
I think you covered most of everything, actually. That was awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, very nice. Enjoyed
So
it.
I got a question for you.
Okay.
When you do you have to decide ahead of time what kind of pictures you're going to take and the way that you set up your strobe? I mean, it seems like you could spend a lot of time trying to get things just perfectly before you take a picture or before you get in the water. Where do you make those adjustments?
Well, the first thing, whenever you jump in with your camera, the first decision, obviously, that you have to make is, are you going to shoot with a macro lens or wide angle lens? And if you're going to shoot, you know, depending on what kind of equipment and stuff you have to decide, well, like for me, am I going to shoot with my 60 millimeter macro if I'm shooting macro, or do I want to use my 105? If I'm shooting wide angle stuff, it's like, well, do I have a, you know, is there a possibility of picking up some subjects out here that are so darn big that I need to use my fisheye lens? Or am I going to be okay with using my reticular in the wider range, like a 10 to 24, or, you know, should I bump it up to an 18 to 55, or even an 18 to 85 millimeter lens? So you have to make that decision first. As far as setting up your strobes goes, obviously, if you're going to be shooting macro stuff, you know, you can kind of preset your strobes, kind of get them in the position you want to get them in. You can do that either on the table and have them hand you the rig down into the water, and, you know, make adjustments after, make some additional adjustments underwater. Or you can do like I do. I basically have them hand me the you know, hand them my equipment. I have them hand me my equipment with the arms folded and stuff, mostly because it works a lot better for me to have it folded up. I unfold everything as I drop down. Uh, Most of the time when I'm shooting wide angle, what I'll do is I'll kind of preset everything as I'm doing my drop, so that I've got that. I'm going to be shooting, you know, with the wide angle with the strobes in tighter than I would for really large subjects. You just kind of have to anticipate where you're shooting, what you might get pictures of, and kind of make adjustments as you go. It's difficult, you know, to get everything to work the right way for every shot that you take. I mean, uh, I've had situations where I've come back in with some pretty darn good sea lion shots, because I was able to capture the sea lions, and my strobes were set, you know, perfectly to avoid a bunch of backscatter. I've had others where they're coming in, and I just, you know, I can't reset my strobes fast enough to keep up with the darn thing. So I kind of have to just trust, you know, that a setting I have will work, you know. But you know, you really, you know, unless you've got really fast moving subjects cruising around, you could probably make adjustments. That's one of the reasons we tell everybody, don't, you know, don't worry about making big adjustments. You know, try to set things up so you can keep your adjustments small. A little tweak, a little here and there, will work best for you.
Yeah, thanks. It does seem like that, a lot of times you end up with, oh, I need it set up just like this. And then, you're not, by the time you back off and make your adjustments while your subject's changed, everything's changed.
Well, one of the things I will tell you is it really is a bummer when you're anticipating not seeing anything big, and you go in, you've got the wrong lens on your camera, and something really, really, really big shows up. I've missed a few opportunities. The one opportunity I missed was the biggest dang green moray eels I've ever seen in my life live there in the boat channel as you're going out of the marina in San Carlos. There's a colony of huge morays that live in that deeper channel out there that people usually don't see. And I had an opportunity. One of those showed up one time. I was in Martini Cove expecting just to shoot little pictures of stuff, and one of those big guys showed up and literally chased me around for a while out there. I guess I looked like something more interesting than the tuna head that was laying on the ocean floor, but I never did get any pictures of that darn guy. And fortunately, when I went in and talked to the folks at Del Mar, they knew exactly what I was talking about. They were really thrilled that I had the opportunity to see those big guys. I wish I could have documented, because like I said, I'd never seen anything that big. But the idea of flexibility, you just have to be looking and thinking and trying to anticipate, what's going to be coming at you. And sometimes you get it, and sometimes not so much.
Well, Phil, thank you. Your examples were fantastic. I really enjoy those, and the instruction too.
Okay, any other questions?
Not for me. Let's go diving.
Really?
With a couple of extra battery packs, huh?
Well, I will tell you that, the guys that use the, CNC types of strobes, if they have battery issues, it's a matter of replacing double A's. So in a sense, that's kind of easier. And nowadays, most of the companies are making strobes that have sealed battery compartments. So if you happen to have a bad O-ring on a cap or something, you don't have to worry about, totally destroying the strobe. You just replace the cap and clean out the battery compartment and stuff like that. I mean, I had an issue, Annette's already left, and I know some of you guys heard about this, but I had an issue my last trip to San Carlos. Annette and I were diving together down there, and the sea lions that we were dealing with were incredibly active. They were just all over us. And I did just great on several dives with them. And then I jumped in and I clicked a couple of good pictures of sea lions and stuff. And then my strobes and camera quit working, just stopped. I couldn't figure out what was going on. As I looked at my rig, when I turned my rig up and looked, I realized that for some reason, my sync cord had come unplugged from the socket on the housing.
Been there.
It was just dangling loose in the water. And that's not easy to do with an Ikelite sync cord, because those things screw in.
Oh,
And
wow.
I'm still trying to figure out how the heck that thing came loose, because I've never not screwed a sync cord in. I guess the easiest way to do it is just to chalk it up to user error rather than trying to blame somebody else for it. But the only thing I could do was plug it in. It worked for a few minutes, and then it stopped because the camera got confused with the electrical signals that it was trying to send the strobes with salt water in there. And so, I ended up basically folding up the equipment, folding up the stuff, and I just had a pleasant dive without taking pictures for the rest of it. Got back to the apartment that I was staying in, and cleaned everything up, and everything worked just fine. So, it's one of those things. There are just a lot of pieces that go with this. If the strobes hadn't kind of frisked my camera out, I could have probably just turned the strobes off and tried to shoot some natural light pictures of sea lions without worrying about lighting them with strobes. But the camera was switched out and it had to be reset and all that kind of stuff. And so it was kind of a weird deal, but you definitely want to make sure, I know I pack too much gear when I go diving, but make sure that you've got enough to be able to take care of emergency kind of situations if anything comes up. So, anything else?
Thank you
Evie,
much.
Evie, it's nice to see you. Or do you have any questions?
No, I'm okay right now.
Okay.
I'll ask you when I go on a trip.
Okay.
Email.
You usually always do. Dave, what'd you have?
I thank you, sir. I appreciate it. I'll talk to you later and let you. I got a couple questions, but
Okay.
I'll deal with them later.
Did you get that picture from Samantha yet?
Not yet. She just got back in town yesterday,
Okay.
and I actually sent her an email and been talking a little bit, so I'll touch base again with her tomorrow.
Okay. All right. Well, if there's nothing else, I'll let you guys get back to your evening.
Thank you very much. Appreciate
Thank you,
it.
Phil.
Oh, yes.
Catch you guys later.
Thank you very
Thank you
much.
very much, Phil. Much appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank
All
you.
right. Speak up, Leslie.
What, Daniel?
Speak up. We can barely hear you.
Evie, I just want to make sure that as a guest tonight that you know about the Desert Dolphins Scuba Club. Obviously you do, because that's how you found us. Please feel free to go to our website or to go to our Facebook page, make sure that you're a guest. And if you send me a note at scubalady16@Yahoo, I can put you on our mailing list. So you will get notifications of the dive club meetings and stuff we do.
Okay. Monty actually sent an email to me a couple of days ago.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Is that, so I think he already got me down in there.
You're not on the newsletter list, I will tell you that.
Okay.
So, but I'll get your email address from him and we'll get you on the newsletter committee.
Yeah, and I think I just signed up, so I think you should get my email right because I signed up today.
Okay.
For the club.
I haven't gotten that yet, but that's okay.
Okay.
I'll sit on Monty until he gives it to me.
Okay, sounds great.
Good
Okay,
meeting you.
guys.
Evie. Take
Bye.
care. Bye, all.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
good night, all.
Good night.